Hi, my name is Ryan Emenecker, and I am Vice President of Marketing and Communications at Converge, the national office in Orlando. And today we're going to be talking about Church Communications 101. In this workshop, we're going to be learning how to plan your communications. We'll talk about how to create content, some email best practices, and also show social media. Oftentimes people ask me from the church level, what do we need to be doing? What are the specific things we need to be doing to communicate well at our church? That's a hard question to answer because there are multiple things and every church is different. Their personality is different. Maybe their mission and vision is similar from church to church, but they carry it out in a different way. And every community that a church is in is different. So it's hard to tell you exactly, step by step, every single specific thing you're going to be doing in communication. So what this workshop really is going to help you do is set a foundation on how to do communications at your church well by planning, focusing on great content, email best practices, and again, social media. So this is really a foundations course to be able to take those things and create great communications at your church. Before we dive in, though, I want to talk about 3 ways you can be successful in communications. So that's quality, consistency, and sustainability. So when we talk about quality is quality of content being more important than the quantity. Oftentimes we spend a lot of time creating a lot of content to fill up Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and emails and website and all of that. And what can happen is the quality of the content isn't as meaningful to the audience we're trying to communicate. So we want to focus on that quality and make sure that we're not just trying to create content to create content. So quality is so important. Another big one is consistency. So being consistent with messaging and timing will help your audience engage long term. So a great example of this is email communications. Setting a specific time each month or each week to send out communications and being consistent with that. And when your audience can expect that they're going to hear from you, that's going to build stronger, better engagement long term. And lastly, sustainability. That's meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of the future. One good example of this is I remember when blogs were just starting to become popular. Working with a lot of clients, everybody was excited to build a blog and start a blog, and everybody wanted to post something every day or weekly. And it really became hard for clients to really stay consistent and have high quality content while doing that. And so that sustainability piece, what often happened is they would have a strong start, and then over time, sometimes even a few short weeks, they would just kind of fall off and suddenly they weren't posting anymore. And so you want to make sure that all of your communication, whether it be blogs, emails, web, social, is going to be something that's going to be sustainable for you and your team so that you can stay consistent and have great quality content that, again, is going to be meaningful to the audience you're trying to communicate to. So let's talk about planning. I think planning is one of the most important parts of communication, yet at the same time, it's often the piece that is looked over or not done. And I believe that the more you can plan and prepare up front, the easier communications will be after that. So let's talk about how we can do a great job at planning our communication. So how do we plan? I recommend creating a monthly calendar meeting. We do that here with our Converge team. We actually meet twice a month. We've got so many items to communicate through across all of our ministries and districts that we just find meeting twice a month is important. But what this does is it gives you time to sit down with the team. So if you're a communications person and if you have a team behind you, maybe it's writers or designers or something like that, sit down with that team. If you're a one person communications team, then I recommend sitting down with some of the pastors from the different ministries in your church. That might include an executive pastor, lead pastor, maybe children's ministries, whoever you think is appropriate, and sit down once a month and just talk about what do we have coming up. I find oftentimes what happens, and if you're a communications person, you've probably experienced this before, but those last minute requests that come in because either you don't know because someone hasn't told you of a communication or something going on in church, and suddenly the day or two before, if someone's asking you to send out an email, this will help to avoid those things. So promote good communications, and that starts again by getting the team together, sitting down and saying, okay, looking at the next few weeks, 3 months ahead, maybe even 6 months to a year ahead, and just talking about what are the major events or serving opportunities we have coming up. What are the campaigns we might be running? That might be a giving campaign or something missions related. You might have stories that you know about that you want to share. Maybe even sermon series. That's always a big one. And even giving specifically and putting those on the calendar. And so the one question you always want to ask as you're sitting down, because it oftentimes can be hard to think about what items to put on the calendar, is ask the question, who needs to know? So you've got your internal audience, which can include those attending your church already, but you've got the external audience, which includes those who maybe aren't attending your church yet, those in the community. So always be asking, who needs to know? As you sit down, think about where should it be communicated. Where are the different places that your message needs to be communicated? So if you're working on a sermon series, what places do you have available that you use as a church where you can communicate this new sermon series coming up, or maybe a giving campaign and stuff like that? So here you can see some examples. You got the church website is a great place, social media. Oftentimes churches have on-stage announcements on Sunday mornings. You can do print materials. Many churches will print, a 4x6 invite card, and they'll set them on the seats in the morning, and then from the stage, they'll let everybody know who attends to take those cards and invite a neighbor. So print materials still work great. Direct mail is a great print material to use during like Easter or Christmas. To send out in the mail, letting people know that you're having services. It's a great way to let your community know that your church is there. And then even a Sunday program, whether that's print or digital, put that in the announcement somehow. Those are some of the typical places where you can communicate that. But again, as you sit down with your team, pull out a calendar and say, what are all the events and campaigns and so on that are coming up, and what's the message, where do we need to communicate it, and mark those on the calendar. My team here at Converge, we typically are planned out 3 to 6 months in advance. We might mark things on the calendar and just to know they're there, and as we get closer, talk out the details, but it's a really great way just to stay on the same page with your team so everybody knows when communication is being sent out. Let's talk about some collaboration tools. So it's great to, as we talk about sitting down and putting things on a calendar, what are some collaboration tools you can use as a team to be able to manage that? If you're, again, a communications person, it's great to invite other ministry team members to be able to see that calendar. It'll help them know, one, what communication is going out to the entire church. Even if they're children's ministries, it's helpful to know when something is being sent for student ministries, or maybe it's an all-church announcement or something like that. So don't be afraid to include the entire team in on this. So some collaboration tools you can use. You've got Google Calendar, which many of us are familiar with. There's also Monday.com and Teamwork. Those are project management tools. My team actually uses Teamwork, and so we manage all of our different communication projects inside of that. but it has a great calendaring tool that we share. And so that's online where we can access on our mobile devices or computers, whatever that might be. Trello is a great tool. I'll show you that here in just a second, but that allows you to organize content and projects in a little bit different way than a calendar. Basecamp, that started as kind of a web development project management tool, but it's kind of turned into a tool that a lot of organizations, including churches, use just to manage projects and communications throughout the church. And then also Facebook has what's called Workplace. I haven't used that too much just because we use some of the other tools, but I've heard that that's a great tool also. So what you're seeing here on screen, that is a calendaring tool from Teamwork. And so you can see this looks like a calendar. In this example, we're in November. And so again, this is what my team uses, and it's a great tool to just be able to organize everything. And so you can see on our calendar, this month, we're really, really busy. And so again, we serve multiple ministries, which many of you communications people serve. And so we have basically blocked out on each day what type of communication is going out. So for example, you can see on Mondays in gray here, that is our weekly email newsletter. And so we can go in there and type in details. You can see in red, those are the different events that are happening that week. So we can be aware of events if we want to do any real-time social posting or anything like that. We've got when stories are going out on our blog in yellow. Those are when emails are sending out specific to different topics. So this is a nice way to be able to organize and get a full glimpse of everything. And then you can see all the different colors. So we color code things according to if it's social, email, an event, even if we're doing some filming or anything like that. So this has just been a really great tool for us to use. And again, it's online, so our entire team can see it. I mentioned Trello before. So this is Trello. Works a little bit differently. What you're looking at here is actually one of our projects. So our email newsletter that goes out every Monday. The way Trello works is it uses a board, which this board is Newsline. That's what we call our newsletter. And then we also have cards. And so you can see here we've got November 22nd, 29th, December 6th, 13th. And so in each of that, what you can do is you can create ideas for content that will go inside of each newsletter. And then you can take those cards and drag them and move them around. And so it's a great way as you're looking ahead to be able to plan content for a newsletter email, for example. Another way that church that I've helped with communications uses Trello is you can actually create projects. So you can see here, this is actually a sermon series called Joe Goes Country. And so we created a list that has all the series planning as part of it. And so we can plan out all the tasks and lists and communications that we want to send out. So for example, for this sermon series, we're going to share a Facebook image and video. We need to add an image to the home page and to the sermon page. We've got to create a title for the stage, sermon notes, a bumper video, and so on. And so this is a great way to kind of get down all of the different tasks you've got to do for a specific communication, and then you can actually assign it to people from there. So Trello is a really useful tool. It's free, so that's even more helpful. But if you have a chance, check that out. And then if you don't want to use either of those, what you can see here is just a printed calendar. So you can print out calendars, or maybe you create something in Word, whatever that might be, and just type in the different communication pieces that are going out. Or you might have something that's more handwritten. I recommend staying digital again, so you can invite other team members in to be able to view the calendar. And again, that promotes great internal communications, and it's easy to update and so on. One of the challenges, if you work, especially in a large church, leading communications, but this can even be challenged in small churches, is how to prioritize communication. With so many ministries and events going on, how do you prioritize communication in a way that you can get the message and the information to the right people, but know when is it appropriate to communicate something on stage, and when is it just appropriate to maybe send only parents an email about something that's going on in children's ministries. So in working with a few churches, one way to do that is to prioritize communication and create levels. Now you can name these levels something if you want to, but for this example, we're just going to go with level 1, 2, and 3. And so a level 1 communication priority, that would be a high level. So that's a communication that applies to everyone. That might be a new sermon series or something like that. That might be a giving campaign. A level 2 is medium priority. So it applies to many of the people in the congregation, but not everybody. And then level 3, that's a low priority. So it applies to maybe about less than a third of the people in the congregation. An example might be, maybe you're sending a specific communication out to students in the youth group. That probably doesn't need to be sent out to the entire church or have it announced on the stage. So let's talk through these a little bit. What could a level 1 priority be? So again, that applies to everyone. So this would be something that you communicate on stage. You would use email, social, print. You might have invitation cards, announcement slides to go along with announcements on the stage. You might even have signage that is around the church, pull-up banners, maybe hanging banners, something like that. And there are other channels, maybe other ideas that you might have. The timing of a level 1 communication would be multiple months leading up to, let's say, an event. So this wouldn't be, since this communication is so important, again, let's say it's a giving campaign, or maybe it's Christmas or Easter, this is something you're going to want to communicate months in ahead. That could start with a save the date and send more communication as you get closer, but this is definitely not, hey, 2 days before we need to communicate something super important. So again, examples could be Christmas, Easter, giving campaigns. It might be VBS for your church, if that's a big part of your church. Level 2, medium priority. So again, this applies to many, but not everyone. And so this doesn't probably need to be communicated from the stage. I would say you might have an announcement time during the stage, and you also might have announcements that the lead pastor does specifically. Announcements, especially coming from the lead pastor, I would make sure to protect those times. So you don't want your lead pastor, necessarily talking about how to do child check-in or something like that for parents or whatever, but you want your lead pastor communicating those extremely important level 1 type communications. So level 2, this might not be something that the pastor or a pastor has to communicate from stage. It might just be part of the announcement slides or something like that. Timing, this doesn't necessarily have to be months in advance. This could be, weeks that you're communicating it. And so some examples of that might be larger church events, maybe a missionary initiatives like small groups that are coming up, maybe next steps. So you're trying to help people in the discipleship process, and so you're communicating with them, maybe a discipleship class that is coming up, or a Bible class or something like that. That may not need months and months of communication, but maybe only weeks. And then level 3, that's low priority. Again, that doesn't mean that it's not important, but it's low priority in the way of who it needs to be communicated to. And again, that's approximately maybe a less than a third of the church. That might be different at different churches. But again, definitely doesn't need to be communicated from stage. Maybe it's only sending an email to the specific audience. So again, if something's going on in youth ministries or children's ministries, you may not want to send that church-wide because the people who don't have kids may not care about that communication. So you want to try and focus those types of communications on the specific audience. And these kind of things could be, a few weeks ahead of time. It could be days leading up to an event or something going on. So these level 3 type communications are probably going to happen a little quicker usually. And so this might be examples, events for new guests, maybe up and coming children's events, something like that. Time change for a Bible study. Let's say it was supposed to be first service and now suddenly it's moving to second service. So take the time to prioritize. So as you sit down with your team, you're working through the calendaring process, you say, we've got these events or programs or Bible studies or whatever it is that you're putting on the calendar. Then the next step would be, okay, how do we prioritize the communication, especially on a Sunday morning when everybody is there? This can really help you as a communication person and also help the rest of the team really get to the point where you can say, okay, what are the priority? Because again, there is a lot to say oftentimes at a church with everything going on in ministry. So let's switch gears a little bit. Again, plan. If you plan right, and in your planning phase, you're talking about, if we're sending out email or this specific communication or something like that, you can even write down ideas on what message you want to communicate and those kind of things. That's important. Let's talk about creating content, and it'll actually help you take that first next step after planning. So what do we mean when we say content? So content can be words on the page, it could be images, videos, it could even be something you're going to download. And so as we start thinking about content, it's important again to think about this. The content is not about you. Oftentimes we're talking about what's going on in the church, we're talking about the church itself and so on, but really we want to talk to the audience and where they're at. And so we want to really make sure we're getting the right message. This is important. The right message to the right person at the right time to inspire them to take action. That is a hard thing to do. It's going to be a frustrating thing to do. It's going to be difficult, but that's what content is about. It's not just giving people information. That's part of it, but it's getting the right message to the right person at the right time so they'll actually do something with it and take action. So to do that, you've got to be able to understand the needs of your audience. So if you're communicating to a parent in children's ministries or youth ministries, whatever you're communicating to them, think about what is their need. Again, going back to that question, what do they need to know? Stop talking about yourself. Okay, oftentimes we use we and us and so on. Use what I call you language and make the content about them. Typically what you're communicating is for them anyways, so talk about it in their terms. Make sure your message is clear. This may seem obvious, but oftentimes that doesn't happen. When we're sitting and planning a message or something like that, we have it all figured out in our head, but as we communicate it out, the person on the other end, that audience, that parent, that somebody that we're communicating with, they don't know anything that we're talking about. So you've got to make sure it's clear and make sure it's appropriate and relevant. And a little saying we have around here is clear beats clever every time. It's okay to have fun and come up maybe with some fun content and stuff like that, but at the end of the day, if it doesn't make any sense to the person reading it, you haven't done a good job communicating. So make sure it's clear. And again, be careful of too much we and not enough me. As I said before, you don't want to sit and talk about the church and what we do and how we do it and it's us and anything like that. No, what you do for the church is for the person on the other end, reaching them and communicating them and so on. So here's a great example of an email of a church you can see here that has taken some of those points and use it. You can see, so never stop learning. So this is actually an email. You're not seeing all of it, but it's an email showing all the different types of opportunities for someone to learn about the Bible, God, and so on at the church. So this is kind of a discipleship type email. And so you can see, never stop learning. Growth is a natural part of life, and we believe you can't do it alone. God created us to grow in the knowledge of Him and live in a relationship with others. So this is definitely about them. This is meeting people where they're at. Even down to, here's an opportunity this church has called Growth Track. So you're seeing here, this is happening on various Sunday mornings, but listen to this content here. Discover your purpose. So there's that you language. Discover your purpose. Make a difference. Growth Track provides you with tools to grow into the mission and calling of Jesus in your life. God has a master plan, masterpiece mission for your life. You can find it. We can help. So you really have that you language. This is about them. This is about helping them grow. This isn't about the church has a class that you can take and where you need to go and so on. Great example of using that you language and making that content audience or user focused. So how do you get to that point? Let's talk about before you write. There are some questions you can ask. So whether you're writing it yourself or you're just planning on what the message is going to be and you're going to hand that off to a writer, here's some questions you can ask. So you can ask, what's the purpose of the communication? Make sure that's clear. Who's your audience? Again, are you writing to parents? Is it the entire church? Is it a student? Or so on. Why does the audience care? That may sound horrible, but you've got to ask that. What is it about this communication, this audience, that matters to them? And then what's the benefit? So don't talk about features, but talk about benefits. How is this event or thing or program or ministry benefiting the audience? And talk about that. You saw that a second ago in the email example I showed you. And what do we want the audience to think, feel when they read the content? So marketing and communications is 80% emotion. So when someone is done reading this, how are they going to feel? What are they going to think? And that's important. That's going to help you write the content with the right tone and message and so on. This is a big one. What is the one thing you want them to know? So oftentimes, communications get sent out and there's too many messages in it. There's too many things to do. So try and narrow down to what's the one thing you want them to know. That'll also, sometimes if you ask that first, along with that question of what's the purpose of the communication, that'll really help you hone in on what that message is. And then what is the one thing you want them to do? We're going to talk about call to actions in a second, but really try and hone in when someone is finished reading your communication or is done seeing your communications in many cases, what do you want them to do it? What's the one thing? So how do you organize content on the page? And this can be email, even social media, website, anything like that. So first thing is again, connect with your audience. This is about relationships. This is not just about delivering information. And so let them know you understand their challenges and opportunities. So you want to approach it emotionally and logically. You've got people on both sides of that. So talk about the solution in a benefit-oriented way. So if there's a challenge, if you're going to have a class, let's say, on teens and social media, talk about parents. We know that social media is challenging and it affects students, but we're offering a class that are going to help you talk to your kids about social media and manage social media. So talk about those benefits and how the class or whatever that solution might be, that thing you're doing is really going to benefit the audience. And that leads into also number 3 there, how the communication is going to help them solve a challenge or an opportunity. And then be clear about what the next step is. What do they need to do when they're done? And then oftentimes you can do what we're called validation. and that's maybe getting a testimonial from another member of the audience. So if you're maybe having VBS, you might get a testimonial from another parent who had children in the VBS and have them maybe record a short little video testimonial, or maybe it's a written testimonial you include in a newspaper article or maybe on the website. So as people are in your community are checking out what your VBS is like, they are seeing other parents who attended the VBS and loved it. So testimonials can be a really great way to validate your message and what you're saying. Real quickly, how do you select the right visuals? That's important. Again, a lot of times we focus so much on words and then it all falls apart with visuals. So again, visuals are content. So make sure you're taking the time to make your visuals great. So visuals should complement and support and help to further the message of the rest of the content on page. So if you're talking about youth ministries, but you're showing kids in preschool, that doesn't match up. So you want to make sure those visuals are complementing and supporting your message. Also, it's often helpful to try and get true to life images and situations, oftentimes that are candid or maybe captured in the moment. Staged and kind of posed photos, the cheesy smile isn't always good and it looks fake, and I think people on the other end can kind of tell they're fake too. And if appropriate in your community, always consider diversity in gender and ethnicity and age. Again, it really depends on your audience and who you're communicating to, but make sure you're paying close attention to that. And then even down to lighting style looks natural and doesn't, appear to be manipulated and stuff. Stay away from fake, stay away from cheesy. That can be helpful. There's a great website called lightstock.com that has Christian photos on it that really does a great job at these types of photos. And you can see a few examples of those there. So no one's staring in the camera, making cheesy smiles or anything like that. And I would say too, if you're going to use photography, try and use photography of your congregation. Photos that are really real of baptisms or children's ministries. I would just say make sure that, especially if you're filming children, that you get a photo release from people to be able to use in any marketing and communications. So another piece, this is big, so much has gone digital. Print is not dead, but digital is definitely in the lead. So how do you write for digital formats? And just a few key things. Break text up on the page. So if you have long, chunky paragraphs, it may not feel natural to break those up, and a little bit different than maybe if you're writing in print. But go ahead and break those up. You want shorter phrases that make the point, and text needs to be easily consumed. If you think about if you're on your phone and on your computer, a lot of people are scanning through the page, so you want to make everything scannable. Be direct and use an active voice. Try and make 1 point per paragraph. That can be helpful. I would say avoid what we call Christianese or marketing speak or like flowery language. There's a lot of Christianese out there that might make sense to people inside of your church and to other Christians, but if you're trying to reach your community, those words may not make sense. So be really aware of those. And again, that goes back to being clear in your communication. If you can, bullet points can be really helpful. That helps kind of break up paragraphs and give kind of short, scannable text. One just kind of side note is when you're listing a URL, you don't have to use www anymore. Initially, when websites were first being created and so on, www was important, but pretty much everybody knows what a website is now, and so you can leave that www off. It makes it just kind of cleaner. And don't put email addresses on the page. They should be links. So, for example, on your website, even in an email, don't, especially on a website, actually put the email address on the page. Robots and web crawlers can actually pick that up, and that oftentimes contributes to spam. So you want to make a call to action and then actually link to an email address. So there are just some tips for writing digital formats. One of the main important pieces is, what is a call to action? So again, we talked about before, if you're going to take all this time to write this great communication piece, if you're going to have someone communicate something on stage or through signage, really no matter what it is, even on social media, you want to make sure you have a strong call to action, a strong next step. Why communicate if someone's not supposed to do something with it? So again, what's a call to action? It's an invitation that encourages the reader to take a specific action. It calls them to do just that, take action. And so here are some types of call to actions. You can use text links, buttons. A form is a call to action. QR codes are a call to action. So as you're planning those communications, even in the planning stage, as you're putting things on the calendar, talk about with your team, ask that question, what do you want people to do? So we're going to communicate this, we're having this event, whatever it might be, what do you want people to do? So how do you write a call to action? You want to determine the following. What are you trying to achieve? Okay, so what's that call to action? Who is the audience? And what is the one action you want to take? Again, oftentimes when we're writing, especially I see this in emails, there can be up to 10 different call to actions. That often happens in newsletters. Sometimes you can get away with that, but in other communications, it just becomes unclear what someone is supposed to do when they get to the end of that piece of communication. So try and really narrow it down to one call to action. That'll really help. And so make your call to actions benefit oriented. Keep them brief. Make sure they're strong verbs. So oftentimes you can see here we've got a list of bad and good communications. Bad ones are click here. I see this a lot in email newsletters. As you scan and scroll down the page, you just see a bunch of click here's. Well, what does that mean? Where am I actually supposed to click? There's like 7 different places to click. So click here is a bad call to action. It just is telling me to click, but it's not unclear what you're actually wanting me to do. Even download is kind of a challenging call to action. What are you wanting me to download? What if there's multiple download links on the page? And then submit and enter. Nobody likes to submit to anything, right? And enter, well, what am I entering? So some great call to actions would be stay connected. Okay, well, that's clear. Watch the video. Okay, so if I click on this link, I'm going to be watching a video. Or read the story. Okay, well, that tells me what I'm going to be doing. And this is a big one you'll probably use a lot, is register to attend. So if you have an event coming up, don't tell someone, click here to register for the event. Why don't you just tell them, register to attend, make that the link, the button link, whatever it might be, and that gets a lot more clear. So let's jump over and just talk specifically about email communications. That happens often, a lot in churches. One of the main communication sources that you're going to be using. Most people like to receive email communications, even though sometimes open rates can be low and engagement, but email communication is still one of the best ways to do that. So types of emails you can use would be promotional events and ministry programs. Maybe you're trying to talk about serving and volunteering opportunities, maybe campaigns and initiatives, giving updates, and there's probably a bunch of other ideas you can add to this list. You can see here an example of a church who's doing a movie night. So you can see they've got a nice graphic at the top there. They've got the date, when it is, and a little description of what's going on. And then you can see that great call to action at the bottom there. Reserve your free tickets. It doesn't say click here. It tells you, if I click on this, what action the user is going to be taking. And in this case, they're asking people to reserve their free tickets. Here's another example there, going back to the one I showed before, but you can kind of see the full email now. Again, these are different opportunities of Bible classes and small group classes that are coming up. And so there's a title and a great description next to it. It's clear on when it's happening. And then you can see, even though these are text links and these are multiple call to actions, in the email, it's clear which one they go to. So if you're wanting to go to Growth Track, then you can learn more about that. Or community groups, you can find a group, and so on. And so think about how you organize that content on the page, and you can take a lot of those points we talked about and just make a nice, clear email there. But this would be an example, again, of ministry programs of a way you can use emails. Here's another one, newsletters. Churches often send those out. I see a lot of, to be frank, ugly and terrible church email communications that go out, especially newsletters. So just be aware of the content you're putting on the page. Many churches, the emails are really, really long, lots of content, and it's just really hard to read through. Here's a good example of one where they've done a great job of prioritizing the content and keeping those text links short. Their content is focused, and it's even personalized. So you can see here, they've got the logo at the top, a graphic, a little description, and this is kind of what the email does along the way. And so remember, you don't have to tell the whole story in an email. You can just give a 1 or 2 short sentence description and then tell them to learn more or register, which drives them to maybe a landing page on the website where you can give them all the details. But you don't have to give everybody all the details right in your email. Now, sometimes there might be a reason to do that, going back to maybe an event that we looked at here a second ago. But since that is just focused on one thing, one event, you can give a little bit more detail. You still might want to send them to a landing page, or maybe you send them to a registration page that has the same details or more information you have to give them. But typically in a church email newsletter, use your website, create landing pages that you can drive your audience to as they read. Some email platforms that we can use. These are probably the 2 most popular, MailChimp and Constant Contact. You're seeing a screenshot here of MailChimp. My team uses MailChimp. It's very user-friendly. It's free up to about 2,000 contacts. Both of these integrate well to different platforms, and so that's important. But MailChimp has pre-existing templates that you can use, that you can apply your own colors and logos and images to, and so it's a great, easy tool to use. Constant Contact is very similar. I know Constant Contact has even an event registration sign-up type piece to it. I'm not sure if that costs or not, but that's another nice benefit of Constant Contact. Managing email lists, that's an important thing. And so what I would try to do is try and have one list. You want to segment that list into groups. So you might have MailChimp, for example, one list of, maybe the list name is Harvest Community Church, and then you have different groups underneath that. Maybe you have people who are in the group of parents of youth, or maybe you break your children's ministries down into different ages, or maybe you have small groups or something like that. You want to make sure that people can unsubscribe and update their preferences. That actually is legally required in emails that you send out. So make sure that's clear. That typically goes into the footer. You've probably seen that in many marketing emails that you even receive. And one important piece is try and pick a system that integrates into your church database. That way you're not trying to manage multiple lists in multiple different places. And so many of the church databases will either have their own email system within it, or they'll connect to a MailChimp or Constant Contact. And that way, when someone's managing their profile in the church database. That information gets sent over to MailChimp or Constant Contact. And again, your two lists are syncing together and you're not having to manage multiple lists in a database. So that can be really, really helpful. So if you're thinking about what church database to use or maybe switch to or whatever the case might be asking that question: what email software does it connect to? And then also develop a strategy for email signups. How are you going to get people to sign up for your emails? And ask people to do that. People don't naturally think that way, but if you want people to receive communication from you, ask them to subscribe. And so you can do that maybe in announcements, maybe in your church program, maybe if parents are signing up their kids to go into children's ministries on a Sunday morning, you can have a checkbox that says, sign up for updates, and that adds them to the list. But think that through. Talk about that as a church staff team, as the communications person. And just some best practices for emails. So again, we kind of talked about this: prioritize content. That means everything can't be important. And as a communications person, that can be very challenging, because as people in ministries are coming to you, they want their thing on top, right? That's why those different levels, priority of communications, can really be helpful. Use that to be able to organize content within emails. Keep it short. Again, link to your website. You don't have to share all of the information in an email. Break text up on the page. Make it kind of in bite-sized pieces for quick and easy consumption. Use short phrases and so on. And when possible, try and use bullet points. That can help break up the content. A big thing, going back to those 3 items I talked about initially, the consistency and sustainability. Send your email newsletter consistently. So as you sit and think about, okay, we want to send out an email communication, plan on what's going to work best for your church. Is that monthly? Is that weekly? But pick something, pick a time, pick a day that you can consistently accomplish moving forward. And that might start off by once a month. That might be every other month. And maybe as you get a systems in place of being able to communicate that, you might be able to increase the frequency, but be consistent. Build that expectation. One example I think of, for years I've been on Thursday mornings at 8:30 a.m. I receive an email from a web development and design company that gives great tips and trends and everything about web design. And I know, again, for the past probably, I think, 10 years, every Thursday morning, I get that email. It's something I look forward to. I know it's going to be there. And so build that kind of consistency. That consistency, again, helps to build that engagement and that expectation with people. But be consistent. Don't forget about mobile. Mobile really has jumped forward leaps and bounds in users using mobile over desktop. So you want to make sure that, especially if you're using MailChimp Constant Contact, preview your email, test it before you send it out to make sure it looks good on mobile devices. And be careful, just don't overuse images, logos, graphics, and colors. You don't, let the images be the color on the page, but you don't need tons of images. You don't need different colored text all over the place, reds and greens and blue all in the same email. That can be very challenging to read. Let's switch gears and quickly talk about social media. Obviously a very big piece and part of communication. So a quick glimpse of the power of social media. I think we all know social media is a big deal. Lots of people have used it, but here are a few numbers for us. These are really the top 3, and typically the top 3 that churches use on a regular basis. But Facebook has over 2 million active users per month. That's huge. And so 69% of Americans and 42% of teens use Facebook. I thought it was interesting that only 5% are 65 plus years old, but a lot of people are on Facebook, obviously. Instagram, over 1 billion users per month. Just over 50% of users are female, and 71% of the users are between the age of 18 to 29, and then that 72% are teens. So definitely geared towards the younger generation. And then Twitter, 397 million users. A large percentage of them are male, but really popular between the 25 to 34 years of age. This is interesting. 48% of the people use Twitter to get the news, so very news focused. So if it's not obvious, why should you use social media? So the people in your church community, they're using social media. We just saw those numbers right there. You as a communications person, people in other ministries that you work with, you know they're on social media. So people are on social media. Those who aren't attending your church on social media. So we want to go where they're at. You can use it to build relationships with people in your community. It's a great place online to connect with people. Many of the social media apps, especially Facebook, that's what it's about, building community. So use it to do that. You can use it to strengthen your relationship with your congregation and even to extend your Sunday throughout the week. So it could really be an extension of your ministry. But as you can see here, you can use it to really make connections with people in a different way. So let's talk a little bit about what the difference is between the three, because they're not all the same. So Facebook, that's to stay connected with your community by posting text and images. And so you've experienced that yourself, but it's really about community connection. Again, social media, a place where people can connect, communicate, and build relationships. Instagram's a little bit different. Its purpose is really a visual platform that enables users to share images and videos, so less text, but sharing photos and images. That's why I think the younger generation is more on Instagram and prefers that. I think about my own daughter and watch her as she's scrolling through Instagram, and she's going 100 miles an hour, and she's tapping the images to say she likes them. She's not even reading. She's just looking at images. And then Twitter, very different from the other two. Really an online news and social networking site used to share really bite-sized thoughts from people or news. So very different from the other two. Really, Facebook and Instagram are the most popular, with Facebook leading that. So as you're thinking about what social media channel your church should be using, I definitely recommend being on Facebook, and then think about also going on Instagram. Again, this goes back to those three things we talked about in the beginning, which I'll mention here in a second, is how do you pick which one to be on, and we'll talk about that. But this at least gives you an idea of what the difference is between the three. Just some ideas on how you can use Facebook. It's got some great tools for you. So typically, Facebook has pages versus group pages. And so we recommend that your church has one Facebook page, but then really take advantage of the group pages. Group pages can be private, public, but you can use it for maybe small groups or youth ministries groups. So you can have that one church page, and then if you're having an event or a small group, or maybe your youth ministries, you can create a group where you can invite people in, especially with youth or children's ministries or something like that, or small groups. Those groups are more protected, so they're not in, out in public, and so you can control the content and the users and so on. So again, Facebook pages for your whole church, Facebook groups for individual ministries. Some large churches have such large, youth or student ministries that they may have their own Facebook page, and that's okay. Again, it's really looking at what's the best way to do it for your church according to size and need and so on. So what types of posts do you want to put on social media? People do so many different things. And again, we want the content to be relevant and meaningful. So here are a few ideas. Sermon clips are a great way, and quotes from the pastors. So you might take last Sunday's sermon and clip a piece of the sermon, if you've recorded it by video, out and post it and ask people what they think. You can take maybe a important quote or important point that the pastor talked about and put that on social media. And that can be encouraging to someone. You can ask people to engage with that content, or maybe you form it in a question where people will, there will be some interaction there. Worship times and upcoming events are a great way to use social media, especially if something is changing. Scripture verses, obviously, are great. People love sharing those. Stories, again, with social media being about building relationships and being social. Stories are really great. And so you can maybe do volunteer stories, or maybe a story of someone in your church. Whether that be through video, or maybe you post a visual and you link it over to a story on the website, something like that. But stories can be really powerful. And even in Instagram and Facebook, you can actually use the stories feature to do some of that. If you have articles maybe that the pastors have written, or maybe resources your churches have created, that's a great way to share those types of things. Even just a simple, how can we pray for you? Asking people how they can pray, and that actually engages the rest of the church family to pray for people also. I think one of the most important is pictures and videos from church events showing life at the church. Things are going on, things are happening. Again, think about some of the people in your community trying to reach. They may not want to attend your church, but they're curious of what's going on, and they see life and vibrance and activity through an event or something like that. That can really help in that case. And then even conversation starting questions on the past week's sermon can be a good thing to do. So there's just some ideas. So let's talk about engage, encourage, and endorse. And so the majority of your posts should focus on engaging and encouraging everyone on your social media, all of the followers. And so endorsing, that means promoting. So endorsing your events should happen less often. Again, social media is about building community. So here's kind of a simple breakdown. These numbers might shift a little bit according to your needs, but in general, about 50% of your posts should be engaging posts. So again, questions about the sermon, or how you can pray, how your church can pray for people, inviting people to attend. Don't forget about that. That's social media is a great way to do that. 30% encouraging posts. Everybody's posting, sayings and scriptures and stuff like that. So you want to be careful not to overload your Facebook with too much of that. And then you can do about 20% of promotional posts. So you don't want to use Facebook just as a promotional platform. Again, it's about building relationships and community with people. So here's some easy tools to help manage some of your Facebook or your social media pages. If you are using, let's say, all three, so you can use like a Hootsuite or a Buffer. My team uses Hootsuite, so you can actually have a Hootsuite account. You connect your Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter channels, and so you can actually go in and set up the posts for all three inside of that, and then schedule the posts right in there. So you're a little less work. You're not having to jump in and out of each of those platforms to maybe schedule content. And so that's a really helpful tool. And then if you're a communications person, but you're not a graphic designer, so you're not sure how to use maybe some of the professional tools, a really great tool out there is Canva. It allows you to pretty much create any type of design, especially social media. You can add and edit videos through there and so on. I believe at the time of this recording, part of Canva is free, but they have some upgraded paid versions. And then Adobe Spark is similar, but I think that actually does cost. So talking specifically about 3 ways to be successful in social media, let's go back to the quality, consistency, and sustainability. So quality, are you providing content that your social media followers need? Are you just posting to post? Consistency, how often will you post during the week? Big question I get from a lot of people is, how often should we post on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter? Well, here's the thing. Do what makes sense for your church. If you Google, how often should I post on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, you'll get an answer. And it's probably going to be Facebook telling you to post 4 to 7 times a week. Well, if you post, Facebook at some level makes money through ads and so on. And remember, you don't work for Facebook. You don't work for Instagram. You don't work for Twitter. So do what's right and appropriate and sustainable and what you can do consistent on each of those channels. If that means only a couple times a week, that's fine. If your church has so much going on and you've got to post something every day a week, that's great too. Which then again leads us to the sustainability piece. How much time can you realistically devote to social media? Again, you don't work for any of the social media platforms. And so what's going to make sense for you where you can put out quality content that's meaningful and that will connect to your viewers, that you can be consistent with, and that's going to be sustainable so that you can be consistent and produce great quality. That goes back to the planning. Plan those social media posts. Probably the worst thing you can do is wake up every day, go into the office and say, what do I need to post today? No, plan ahead so you know what you're doing that day. Think about what's going to be sustainable and stick with it. And just a few notes when it comes to social media. Make sure you limit your risks. So be careful not to share any personally identifiable information. Keep children's info private. Make sure you have permission to post pictures of people. Beware of copyright laws. So if you're sharing other videos or music or whatever it might be, typically there's copyrights on those. So you got to be careful not to essentially steal that content and use it as your own. And then don't post confidential information, like prayer needs or maybe private facts, names of missionaries or military members maybe that you're supporting or anything like that. And really make sure you protect your pastors and your staff also. Most importantly, social media can be fun, so have some fun with it. Again, use it to build relationships, and it's about sharing Jesus' love with your congregation and community. That's really what this is all about. Communicating well to the right person in the right way at the right time so people can get connected to Jesus, whether that's through the people in your church, going to church, an event, or something like that. We want people to know Jesus. And this is having great communication, practice in a great way is going to help your church do that. Thanks for taking the time to listen. Hope this has been helpful, and enjoy.